Hello everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we're meeting, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. For those that don't know me, I'm Katie Gallagher and the Chief Minister of the ACT. To the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, to Jenny McAllister, the National President of the Australian Labor Party, to all the federal and state ALP colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak briefly with you today. It's an honour to speak here on such a historic site for the Labor movement, and also an enormous pleasure to introduce a Labor leader who stands tall amongst the many who have addressed crowds at these rail yards in the past. To state the obvious, times have changed, but the importance of strong, progressive, articulate and inclusive leadership in the ALP across the progressive landscape broadly are as important as ever. That's why I'm among many Labor members genuinely excited by the new leadership team of the Federal Parliamentary Party, led by Bill Shorten, Tanya Plibersek and Penny Wong. There is, I believe, some irony in the post-election analysis, particularly in the idea that the ALP must overcome its obsession with the cult of personality around the national leadership. Of course, this is true. The irony is it will take the right personalities to overcome it. People with the courage to steer the public debate away from the political and the personal and into the arena of policy and ideas, to focus on the substance of discussions such as those happening across the weekend here in Sydney. It's not easy to do so. Just a few weeks ago I was watching Q&A and we saw Tanya having to turn down Tony Jones time and time again as he pleaded with her to stop talking about the achievements of her government and instead dissect Kevin Rudd's personality. We all understand the media perspective. Personality is easy, scandal is easy, tweeting a scoop is easy. Conducting a balanced, mature debate about the direction of a nation is far more difficult. But this is where progressive voices, values and ideas must persist. They endure far longer than the rapid burn of the media cycle. When we engage with our community, when we embrace the risk of floating bold ideas and argue the merits of an issue, we earn respect and over time we earn support. If I can just give you a recent example from my own experience, and I refer to the issue of marriage equality. The majority of the ACT community, and I believe the Australian community, support legislative change. Indeed, as I said during the debate over the ACT's marriage equality bill, on this issue the Australian people have moved faster than our political institutions have been able to respond. In the ACT we have responded, and we were proud to pass marriage equality legislation just 2 weeks ago. Nationally, the ALP has also shifted our position by making it an issue of conscience for parliamentarians, thanks in no small part to the advocacy of Tanya Plibersek. In 2011, Tanya gave a memorable speech to the party conference where I sat in the audience. She talked about the long journey the Labor government had travelled to remove discrimination against people because of gender or sexuality through some 85 pieces of legislation. And yet, as she said, until marriage is an equitable institution, the job is not done. Almost equal is not enough. So for us, we are starting on that journey, and as many of you would know, there is no telling how the High Court will rule, which is where our legislation currently sits. But the crux of this debate has nothing to do with jurisdiction or process. It's about ending discrimination, and there is comfort to be gained by standing up for a principle that so many Australians believe in. When the day comes, as I believe it will, this reform is made nationally, it will become entrenched like other reforms at first opposed by Conservatives but now immune to challenge because they are so clearly right, such as Medicare and universal superannuation. The same goes for the reforms which by history the Rudd-Gillard government will be judged well on: health reforms, plain packaging on cigarettes, disability care, school funding reform, action on climate change, a closer engagement with Asia in foreign and trade policy. This is a legacy to defend and one which I think will grow in hindsight. As we enter a new period in federal politics, progressive voices must be ready to have their values and their ideas challenged. In the ACT, we've already had our values and our jurisdiction challenged by the new government. Our marriage equality laws were before the High Court 24 hours after they passed the ACT Assembly. Across Australia, federal members and state and territory governments are getting acquainted with a new style and a new ideology of government, and for me, a strong opponent of open government, a more closed government than we've seen for many years. Time will tell how significantly the national policy framework and the national debate will be affected by the change of government. We do know of some of the debates of national significance, which will be debated in the new federal parliament. And history suggests that whether in government or opposition, it often falls to progressive leaders to advocate for opportunity, to advocate for fairness, and to advocate for justice in the national debate. It's possible we will be required to be the voice of reason, once again, of fairness and of equality. Despite these challenges and despite the election defeat, I believe the ALP has taken some very important steps in reunifying and re-energising. This is in part because of empowering members in the selection of the leader. I went to the leadership forums in Canberra and I caught up with ALP members that I hadn't seen in years, probably decades. Hundreds of people packed into rooms, and I know this was replicated around the country. We need to see more of it. The leadership team elected is a team with the ability to lead further party reform, to drive for more membership, and to give an ongoing and meaningful voice to the rank and file members, which will create a bedrock of support on which to build the next campaign. In introducing Tanya Plibersek, and it is an honour to do so, I want to pay a very public thanks for the enormous contribution she's made to Labor's success and to our success in the ALP, particularly in last October's election. Tanya helped launch our campaign and I think provided us with the enthusiasm and courage to go on and win that campaign, an unprecedented fourth term and the only Labor government to have a swing towards us since 2006. I've also had the enormous privilege of being Health Minister with Tanya over the last few years. I've seen how she works, her ability to listen and to respond, her strength of purpose and conviction. It's these qualities that are something that every politician, actually not just politicians, actually every leader should learn from. As a leader, she possesses all the best of the qualities and values which I've been speaking about today, the best of the modern Australian Labor Party. As she said herself, how competitive Labor is in 3 years is completely up to us. Her integrity, her character, her gift for communicating and her party loyalty are just some of the qualities which will serve the future of the party so well. She's an outstanding minister, an outstanding local MP, an outstanding advocate of progressive politics, and she's already doing an incredible job in her new role. So it's with real pleasure to introduce the Honourable Tanya Plibersek.
Thank you, Katie, so much for that too kind introduction. I want to start by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here with Chifley Chairperson Nick Martin and with many friends and colleagues and comrades, members of Parliament, local government representatives, party members, union members, friends one and all. I also want to just particularly mention two very dear friends, Jenny McAllister, our party president, and my first boss in politics, former Senator Bruce Childs, who took me on when I was very young and very green, and probably the most important thing he taught me is that you can spend a whole life, a whole career in the Labor movement and in representative politics and never lose your principles, because Bruce he's just a shining example of someone who lives his values every day. It's such a pleasure to share a stage with Katie. On the 22nd of October, I think the whole nation was watching with enthusiasm when we saw what happened with the same-sex marriage legislation that was passed through the ACT Assembly. I think this has become a terrifically important and symbolic question for people in progressive politics, because a whole lot of the other discriminations have been removed now. We, in our time in government, got rid of all of the legal discriminations except for in the Marriage Act. And when I was Health Minister, for example, we did things like take gender out of the Medicare item numbers. So if you were intersex or transsexual, you wouldn't be accidentally discriminated against. We did the same in Centrelink when I had Human Services. So there's so much work has been done to remove discrimination, except for this one last thing. And that's what we were talking about at the national conference, that you can't really talk about equality when you've got this one last legislative barrier that says to people in same-sex relationships that their relationships are not as valuable to society, and they shouldn't expect to be able to acknowledge and celebrate them in the same way as heterosexual couples. And one of the things that Katie said that really I think is so important in this debate is that the community has moved well beyond where their parliamentary representatives are on this issue. I was brought up by two very devout Catholics who took me to church every Sunday, who made me go to confession on Saturdays, who still ate fish on Fridays, well after the Vatican said you didn't have to give up meat on Fridays. But my parents never, ever, ever once in my life gave me the idea that there was anything wrong with being gay or lesbian. And I checked in again with my 81-year-old mother the other day. Well, what do you think about this stuff in the ACT? She said, oh, it's beautiful. People love each other. They should be able to get married. And I tell that story because I think that's where the bulk of the Australian community is, and this assumption that you can judge by the fact that someone's involved in organised religion or whatever, that they won't support marriage equality, I think is absolutely wrong. And Katie, I think that your success at the last election, your party's success at the last election, is very much because you are someone who lives and implements your convictions every day, and I'm very proud to call you my friend. Thanks. I also just, I'll finish on this note. I noticed Christine Milne was there when you were celebrating the legislation that had passed through the ACT Assembly, and I think that this way that the Greens have of attaching themselves to these issues and somehow claiming that they are responsible is the real difference between what it is to be a mainstream progressive party and what it is to be a minor party. We are the only party that could never have got through the ACT Assembly without Labor and without Katie Gallagher. And that's on all of the issues that we care about. We need to have numbers in Parliament to get those issues through parliaments. And the sort of, post-fact attachment of Christine Milne to your good work, I think is a kind of depressing insight into the way that minor parties, in particular the Greens, operate. I want to talk a little bit about our term in office and the achievements, because they're achievements that everybody in this room should be proud of. And they're achievements that we shouldn't forget and shouldn't be afraid to continue to talk about and promote. Disability care, a fair deal finally for some of the people who have been most disadvantaged in our community. Exactly the sort of groundbreaking reforms that Labor governments throughout history have made, including, of course, the government of Ben Chifley and his historic changes to the pension. Huge schemes like the pharmaceutical benefits scheme that was introduced after the Second World War. It started with the idea that soldiers should be able to afford certain medicines, and it became a scheme that was expanded to the broader community so that we have medicines that cost $100,000, $200,000 a year, but you will never pay more than $36.10 for a prescription, or $5.90 if you're a pensioner. Now, we take that for granted so much today. I think most Australians don't even realise that medicines can be subsidised to that extent, because it's become so much a part of our everyday expectation of what governments do. But without a Labor government, that wouldn't have happened. We managed to keep the Australian economy strong and growing through the global financial crisis, and I'm so pleased that my friend Wayne Swan is going to be addressing you this afternoon, because Wayne won International Finance Minister of the Year for his efforts during the global financial crisis. I think he should have won International Finance Minister of the Decade. No, seriously. This is... Australia is the only country in the OECD not to have gone into recession. We created 1 million jobs during our time in government, when around the world 28 million jobs were lost. And that's not just individuals who lose their job and all the flow-on effects for their family and their community. That is generations of people who are unlikely ever to work, because by the time the number of jobs rebounds, the next generation of job seekers is graduating. You're talking about embedded intergenerational poverty, because those governments didn't act in the way that we did during the global financial crisis. And what did we do with our stimulus money? We invested it in upgrading schools, some of the first upgrades that some schools had seen since the Whitlam era. We invested it in 21,000 new public housing dwellings. We invested it in projects like urban rail. We spent more as a government on urban rail, public transport, than every other government since Federation combined. We invested productively when we invested. Carbon pricing, against one of the most base scare campaigns in Australian political history, we put a price on carbon, and more importantly, in a way, a cap on pollution. We put a cap on pollution, and in the face of extraordinary opposition. In my area, Kids Dental starts on the 1st of January. It's basically Medicare dental for kids. There'll be 3.4 million children who'll be able to go to the dentist with their Medicare card from the 1st of January because of what we did. And huge social reforms as well, like the Royal Commission into child abuse. So many things that I could talk about as achievements that I'm proud of, but the reason I'm listing them is not just to give you the list of things that I'm proud of, but to remind you and convince you that Labor governments are always the governments of the 2 steps forward, and Conservative governments are always the government of the 1 or more steps back. It is always Labor governments that are instituting those progressive reforms, and every time the Conservative governments come in after one of these major reforms, they try and reverse it. You look at Medibank. Liberals came in, privatised Medibank. We had to introduce Medicare next time we're in government. That's what's going to happen with disability care. They're already talking about giving disability care not to the organisation that's been set up with the expertise to do it, but to Medibank Private, because it's just another service really, isn't it? And I think the thing that I want to say about the Labor Party and this 2 steps forward that is our history is that it has happened, and it is a feature and a product of the type of debate that you've been having this weekend, the type of discussions that we've been having. People join the Labor Party, they get involved in union politics, they get involved in the broader Labor movement because they care about our country, they love it, they think it's wonderful, but they know that it could be even better if we make some changes. And people talk about the unity that the Liberals exhibited during the election campaign. I think that this is a really interesting point for us to discuss. What have been the policy debates in the Liberal Party? I mean, it is very difficult to think of a single thing that you would say, this is something that different people care passionately about, in the Conservative parties, and they're really fighting it out to find out what the best solution is for Australia. There's been conflict. There's been Tony Abbott saying that they should have this roll gold paid parental leave scheme that gives the most money to the highest earners, and the Nationals saying, no, we think stay-at-home mothers should get, same sort of payment for having children. And there's been a few debates like that, but none of the debates are the sort of constructive, in-depth debates that we are having here this weekend. And the unity that you see is a sort of, I think they're a bit like the orcs of Sauron, actually. They've sent out information to do maximum damage. But when you look a little bit, scratch the surface a little bit, it's a very odd collection of people with different barrows to press. There's the sort of agrarian socialists in the National Party, there's the, free markets rule kind of Malcolm Turnbull types, the, financial services sector, should call the shots in government. There's the H.R. Nichols Society, Peter Costello types. They do rub up each other the wrong way, but we have, I don't think, ever seen from them the sort of discussions about how you can have a democratic Liberal Party that we have in the Labor Party. We've never seen the sort of discussions about how do we address poverty, how do we change our economy, how do we change our society to help the most disadvantaged. And I think, frankly, the poorer for it. That they see their time in government basically as looking over their shoulders at what the last Labor government did and working out how to unwind it as quickly as they possibly can. Tony Abbott's vision for the country. What is it? Well, he likes the monarchy. We know he likes the monarchy, but I think after seeing him, for whatever it is, 4 years now, you would have to say that his vision for country is whatever they said, the opposite. And I think that's a really poor way of trying to govern a country. He did, as I said earlier, lead a disciplined election campaign, and I think this is one of the things that we do need to consider as a Labor Party. This contest of ideas is the best and healthiest expression of why people join the Labor movement. But we do need to learn something about the way we speak about each other and our ideas in public. It's not a thing about rules, it's not a thing about avoiding the passions that we feel, but it's a cultural question about how we treat each other during those debates. I think it's very easy, Bruce actually taught me this, that people think you're either a lot better than you are or a lot worse than you are. And sometimes we get in our corners in the Labor Party and we demonise our opponents within the Labor movement. We can't afford to do that anymore. We could never really afford to do it. It's cost us a great deal. And I think it's fair to say that during the last election we largely beat ourselves. We can't afford to demonise other people in the Labor movement rather than engage constructively, thoughtfully, deeply with our debates. So when we talk about our vision for the future and how we'll achieve it, I want to take the goodwill that's in this room today and yesterday and actually use that in all of our party forums, not to avoid the debates that matter to us, but to ensure that when we have those debates, we do it in a way that's thoughtful and respectful and focuses on ideas and not personalities. I don't think any of us is confused about what our purpose is, what our vision is. People look at conferences like this and they think, isn't it ridiculous that they have to get together and think about what it is that they believe in? I don't think that's true at all. I think our vision never changes. Our vision is for a strong economy and a fair society. Our vision is for prosperity with purpose. Our vision is for taking the wealth that this country has in spades and making sure that hard work counts, but if you're having a tough time, you know that you'll get a helping hand. I don't think that changes over time. Not the what or the why of the Labor Party, that doesn't change. But the how has to change all the time, because every year, every decade, we find new problems that confront us and new solutions to those problems are presented. So the how is what we debate at these conferences. And if we can debate that how thoughtfully and respectfully, I think we're on track. I think we're on track to come back into government and be prepared when we're back in government. In 1949, Ben Chifley said, "The Labor movement exists to promote social and economic security for people, higher living standards, and the progressive expansion of Australia as a nation in the world community of nations." Could have been any one of our Prime Ministers that said that. That doesn't change, but the how will always change. Mind you, I did have a bit of a laugh when Tony Abbott said if Chifley were alive today, he'd be a Liberal. I think if Malcolm Fraser were Prime Minister today, he'd be Labor. So the how. How do we promote sustainable economic growth? How must our industries and our workplaces adapt to change? How do we relate to our trading partners? How do we make sure our workplaces are fair as well as productive? How do we ensure that Australians who've missed out, who've been treated unfairly, faced setbacks, get back on their feet? And how do we care for our most vulnerable? How do we build that strong economy and fair society that each of us believes in and strives for? If we spend the next few years thinking that Tony Abbott will overreach or his lack of popularity will do him in and that we'll return to government by default, then we're dead wrong. It won't happen that way. We need to lay out for Australians what our vision is for the nation, and make sure that it's a more compelling vision than whatever it is that Tony Abbott believes in, and more compelling than the destructive negativity and scare campaigns that got Tony Abbott into power. That's where the Chifley Research Centre and the wider progressive movement has such an important role to play. Opposition provides us the silver lining in what is a very dark cloud. Opposition provides us with the time to take stock and to regroup. Now's the time to debate policy ideas and work out how we can energise our Labor movement into the 21st century and beyond. As Deputy Leader, I'm very much looking forward to having those conversations with you. Thank you.